AITA for not giving my relatives free legal services as a lawyer because they've always treated me as the black sheep. I grew up in a small, suffocating town in Florida, the kind of place where the humidity clings to your skin like a second layer and the mosquitoes are as relentless as the gossip. It was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone, and no one really did much with their lives except exist. My family was the embodiment of that mindset: live for today, don't think about tomorrow, and never, ever take life too seriously. They were loud, outgoing, and always up for a good time. My parents were deeply involved in Mardi Gras crews, hosting parties and parades like it was their life's mission. My siblings were all about sports: football, cheerleading, baseball, anything that kept them outside, running wild, soaking in the heat that I absolutely loathed. They were the kind of people who thrived on attention, who lived for the roar of the crowd, who embraced the chaos of our town like it was a privilege to be part of it. And then there was me. I was the weird one. The quiet one. The one who would rather sit inside with a book than run around in the sweltering sun. I hated the heat, hated the stickiness of the air, hated the expectation that I should be just like them. From a young age, I knew I didn't fit. I was the kid who spent hours playing chess by myself, who joined the debate team, who actually cared about school. While my siblings and cousins had the entire family rallying around them for every game, every tournament, every mindless event they participated in, I sat in empty auditoriums during debate competitions, with no one in the audience except a few bored parents who had nowhere else to be. My parents never showed up. My siblings never came to support me. No one in my family ever really made an effort to be part of my world, but they had no problem ridiculing it. They'd tease me about being a bookworm, about wasting my time with things they didn't understand, about not being fun like the rest of them. It was always in that, just joking, tone, but it wore me down, made me realize early on that I was an outsider in my own family. So I did what any kid in my position would do: I worked hard. I poured everything into my education, into building a life that was as far removed from my upbringing as possible. I got into a great university, the first in my family to do so, and then I went to law school. While my cousins and siblings were partying, working dead-end jobs, or just coasting through life, I was grinding, sacrificing, building something real. And as the years passed, I drifted further and further from them. The calls became fewer. The visits stopped altogether. I didn't mind. Honestly, I preferred it that way. They had never been there for me in any real way, so why should I go out of my way to stay connected? Now, I have a life I built on my own. I'm happily married to an incredible man, a judge, no less, and I run my own family law practice. I have everything I ever wanted: stability, success, independence. But my family? They only call when they need something. They never reach out just to check in, to see how I'm doing, to offer a kind word. No, when my phone rings and it's a relative, I already know the deal. They want free legal advice. They want help with a traffic ticket. They want me to bail them out of some mess. And every single time, I brush them off. I'm too busy. I can't help. Because why should I? They only see my worth when it benefits them. Recently, though, my sister, one of the golden children, the athlete, the fun one, the one my parents always adored, lost custody of her kids to her ex-husband. Apparently, she hired a terrible lawyer, and now she only gets them every other weekend. I wouldn't have even known about it if my older sister hadn't called me, practically in tears, begging me to take the case for free. She didn't start with pleasantries. She didn't ask how I was doing. She just launched right into it, as if I had been sitting around waiting for my family to grace me with a request. She told me that I had to do this, that I was her only hope, that I needed to step up and help family. And I was honest with her. Brutally honest. I told her that I didn't even know her kids. I couldn't pick them out of a lineup if my life depended on it. And I wasn't going to spend hours of my time, take on a complicated custody case, and do it all for free when she hadn't spoken to me in years. I told her that if she really cared about reconnecting, she would have reached out before she needed something. She would have tried, at some point in the last decade, to be my sister instead of a stranger who only calls when she's desperate. She got angry. She called me selfish, heartless. I could hear the disbelief in her voice, as if she truly thought I was obligated to drop everything and save her. I didn't waver. I told her no. Then my mother called. And she was furious. She shamed me for refusing to help, accused me of turning my back on my family, of thinking I was too good for them now that I had money and success. She brought up all the other relatives who had asked for favors over the years and how I had let them down. And I snapped. I asked her point blank, when was the last time any of them called me just to see how I was doing? When was the last time someone in our family made an effort to connect with me without an ulterior motive? I told her that my cousin is a landscaper. He could have offered to do some yard work in exchange for legal services. My sister could have offered to pay me back, or at least made some kind of effort to show appreciation. But no, they all expect me to work for free, as if my time and effort mean nothing, as if my job is just some magical gift that I should hand out without hesitation. I went off on her. Years of pent-up frustration, of being the overlooked kid, of always being the one left out, it all came pouring out. And she didn't like it. She hung up on me. Since then, I've gotten messages from various relatives, some trying to guilt-trip me, others outright insulting me. But not a single one of them has called to say, I understand. Not one of them has acknowledged the way they've treated me all these years. And I'm okay with that. I made my choice. I built my life. And I refuse to be used by people who never truly saw me as family until it was convenient for them. So, am I the asshole? Update 1. Several months passed after that explosive call with my mother, and honestly, I had almost forgotten about the whole ordeal. Life went on as usual. I was busy with my cases, running my practice, and enjoying the peace that came with not having my family's constant demands looming over me. My husband and I took a long overdue vacation, something we hadn't been able to do in years. It was refreshing to be surrounded by people who actually valued me, who didn't see me as some walking, talking legal aid machine. I had finally reached a place where I no longer felt guilty for distancing myself from them. If anything, I felt lighter. And then, of course, the universe decided that I hadn't had enough yet. One afternoon, my phone rang, and I saw my uncle's name flash across the screen. This was the uncle who had always prided himself on being the smartest in the family. He was a mechanic, one of those guys who thought that because he could fix an engine, he was qualified to have an opinion on everything from politics to medicine to, of course, the law. Growing up, he was always the one loudly debating things he had no knowledge about, always convinced that he knew best. I hadn't spoken to him in a while, and for a brief, naive moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, this was just a normal, friendly call. Of course, it wasn't. He started off casually, acting like nothing had happened, like there hadn't been a huge falling out between me and the rest of the family. He joked around, asked how I'd been, mentioned some distant cousin who had apparently gotten engaged, and gave me a half-hearted, hope you're doing well, before he finally got to the real reason for his call. His best friend, some guy I had never met in my life, was going through a divorce. Apparently, his wife had finally had enough and left him, and now he was desperate for a good lawyer. The problem? He didn't have the money to afford one. My uncle, in his infinite wisdom, had decided that this was the perfect opportunity to call me up and ask for a favor. He played it off as if he was doing me a favor, saying it wasn't a complicated case and that I wouldn't have to do much. Just a little paperwork, maybe a court appearance or two, nothing major. Family for family, he called it, as if his friend, some random man I had never spoken to in my life, was suddenly my blood relative. I sighed, already exhausted by the conversation. I told him, calmly and professionally, that I didn't work for free. I explained that my practice had expenses, that I had a staff to pay, an office to maintain, and that even at a discount, my minimum rate was $500 per hour. I had barely finished my sentence before he burst out laughing. Not just a little chuckle, full-blown, exaggerated, almost mocking laughter, like what I had just said was the funniest thing he had ever heard. He told me that was absurd, that no one's words were worth that much, that I was out of my mind if I thought talking in a courtroom was worth $500 an hour. I didn't miss a beat. I told him, plain and simple, that judging by how often my family asks for my words for free, they are clearly priceless. He didn't have anything to say to that. There was a beat of silence, just long enough for me to know I had hit a nerve, and then he hung up. A few months passed after that explosive call, and I had almost forgotten about all this drama when I received another call, this time from my uncle, who works as a mechanic and always considered himself the smartest in the family. He started the conversation as if nothing had happened, joking, asking how I was doing, and then, of course, got down to business. His best friend was getting divorced and needed a good lawyer, but he didn't have the money to represent him in court. "Well, it's not a complicated case, just help him a little, like family for family," he said. I calmly replied that I didn't work for free and that even with a discount, the minimum rate was $500 per hour. My uncle burst out laughing, said that this was absurd, that, "What do you think your words are worth so much?" I replied to him, "Judging by how often my family asks for my words for free, they are clearly priceless." He hung up. Update 2. A few weeks passed after the call with my uncle, and I was starting to think that, for once, my family had finally gotten the message. No unexpected calls, no guilt-tripping voicemails, no desperate attempts to cash in on my profession. It was quiet, eerily so. It was the kind of silence that should have felt like relief, but instead, it carried the weight of an unspoken truth: they weren't done yet. They were just waiting for their next opportunity. But for that brief period, I let myself believe in the illusion. Life moved forward, and I embraced it. My firm was thriving, my casework was fulfilling, and my husband and I had settled into a rhythm that felt effortless. We had dinners together without interruptions, weekend mornings spent lingering over coffee without an urgent text demanding my time. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking over my shoulder, waiting for the inevitable moment when someone would drag me back into the cycle of obligation and expectation. I had drawn my boundary lines, made my stance clear, and I thought, foolishly, that they had finally learned to respect it. Then, of course, it happened again. This time, it was a cousin. Not a close cousin, not even one I had grown up with. In fact, I hadn't seen or spoken to him in at least 10 years, maybe more. He was one of those distant relatives that barely registered as family, someone I only vaguely remembered from childhood gatherings, a name that occasionally popped up in conversations at reunions but had no real significance in my life. He was just another person in the ever-growing list of people who shared a last name with someone I knew but had never made any effort to be part of my world. Out of nowhere, he found me on social media. I noticed his name in my notifications when he started liking every single post I had made in the last several years. Not just the recent ones, he went deep. Anniversary pictures, work achievements, even a random photo I had posted years ago of my dog sleeping in a sunbeam. At first, I ignored it. People get nostalgic. They stumble upon someone they used to know, and suddenly, they feel the need to reconnect. It wasn't the first time an old acquaintance had resurfaced, and it wouldn't be the last. Then the messages started. At first, they were casual. Friendly, even. Full of fake warmth and exaggerated enthusiasm, carefully crafted to make it seem like he genuinely cared about catching up. He talked about the good old days, but the way he spoke about them made it clear he was remembering a version of history that had never actually existed. He reminisced about things I barely recalled, like how we had both attended the same family reunion when we were kids or how we had played together at some wedding when we were barely old enough to walk. He acted as though we had always been close, as if there had been a deep connection between us that had only been lost due to time and circumstance. It was all so forced, so obviously scripted, that I knew instantly what was coming. He wasn't reaching out because he genuinely missed me. He wasn't interested in rekindling some long-lost familial bond. He was setting the stage, buttering me up, lulling me into a false sense of sentimentality before slipping in whatever request he was about to make. And sure enough, after a few days of this manufactured nostalgia, he finally got to the real reason for his sudden reappearance in my life. His marriage was falling apart. His wife had decided to file for divorce, and he was spiraling. He wasn't just worried, he was outright panicked about the financial consequences. He was convinced that she was about to take half of everything he owned, that she would bleed him dry, that he would end up with nothing. The desperation practically bled through the screen as he typed, but beneath the panic, there was something else: entitlement. A quiet, underlying assumption that because I was family, I would fix this for him. He laid it on thick. He told me he had heard all about my success, that he knew I was an amazing lawyer. He made sure to throw in flattery, as if telling me how incredible I was at my job would somehow make me forget that I had already drawn this boundary 100 times before. He played the "we're family" card, as if those two words had the power to erase the years of distance, as if they alone should be enough to compel me to drop everything and help him. Then he asked the question I had been waiting for: could I help him? I didn't hesitate for even a second. I told him that of course I could take on his case. The cost? $50,000 up front. The reaction was immediate. I could practically hear him choking on his own breath through the screen. The shock was so palpable that I imagined him staring at his phone, rereading my message over and over again, convinced he had misunderstood. He took several minutes to respond, probably expecting me to follow up with some kind of clarification, to laugh it off as a joke. But I didn't. I let the silence hang between us. When he finally did reply, it was exactly what I had expected. He sputtered out some nonsense about how it was just a simple case, how it was just paperwork, how it couldn't possibly be worth that much. As if a decade of legal education, years of courtroom experience, and countless hours of expertise could be reduced to just pushing a few papers across a desk. I stayed calm, as I always did. I told him exactly why my expertise was worth every cent. A case like his wasn't just about filling out documents, it was about strategy, about ensuring that he didn't make mistakes that could cost him far more in the long run. Divorce cases weren't just about who signed what, they were about leverage, about positioning, about knowing the law inside and out. A single misstep could mean losing assets, being stuck with unfair alimony payments, or worse, ending up in a legal battle that dragged on for years. I told him that my knowledge and skills weren't just about what I did, but about what I prevented. He didn't argue. He simply said he would think about it. And then, just like that, he never wrote again. I calmly explained that my expertise allows him to avoid mistakes that could cost him much more. He said he would think about it and didn't write any more. Update 3. The climax of this entire saga came when my mother, still licking her wounds from our last explosive conflict, called again. This time, though, her tone was different. The usual accusations, the passive-aggressive guilt trips, the over-the-top dramatics, all absent. Instead, she sounded measured, almost diplomatic. It was as if she had finally accepted that the tactics she had used for years weren't going to work on me anymore. That alone was enough to put me on edge. My mother never approached anything delicately unless she was trying to get something. She had always been the type to go straight for the emotional jugular, to wield guilt like a weapon, to expect immediate compliance because, in her mind, that was the natural order of things. So hearing her voice now, even, controlled, almost careful, felt unnatural. She was someone who was used to getting what she wanted through sheer force of will, and now, for the first time, she was having to approach me like an equal rather than someone she could manipulate. That was already telling. It meant that whatever she was calling about wasn't just a casual request or another attempt at wearing me down with emotional blackmail. It meant that she and the rest of them had come to a reluctant realization: if they wanted something from me, they were going to have to play by my rules. She started off with small talk, the usual pleasantries that I knew weren't genuine but were meant to soften me up. She asked about my life, my work, my husband, making it seem like she cared. I knew she didn't. If she had, she would have asked these things when she didn't need something from me. But I let her talk, let her go through the motions, listened with the detached amusement of someone watching a well-rehearsed performance. I could practically hear the effort in her voice, the way she was forcing herself to maintain this veneer of civility. It was almost impressive how much self-restraint she was showing. And then, of course, she got to the point. She explained that my sister had decided to go back to court for custody. Apparently, the arrangement she had now, every other weekend, wasn't working for her anymore. Whether it was because she had a legitimate case or because she was simply angry and wanted to fight, I didn't know, and I didn't particularly care. What I did know was that she needed a good lawyer, and after the disaster of her last attempt, the family had finally accepted something they had always known but had been unwilling to admit: I was the best option. For once, they weren't trying to demand free work. There was no attempt to frame it as my duty, no moral posturing, no outraged demands about family loyalty. My mother, speaking carefully, as if she was afraid of setting me off, said, "We understand that you won't work for free." She emphasized each word like it was physically painful for her to say, as if she had spent hours preparing herself to utter that sentence without choking on it. I almost laughed. The fact that it had taken multiple burned bridges and harsh conversations for her to acknowledge that my labor had value was almost comical. But then she continued, hesitating slightly before offering an alternative. But maybe we can work something out. That was what this was. A negotiation. They had accepted that I wasn't going to roll over and give them free legal services, but they still wanted a deal. They wanted to bargain with me like I was some street vendor, as if my time, my expertise, my years of education and work experience were just another commodity to be haggled over. It was almost insulting, but at the same time, it was progress. They had finally, begrudgingly, recognized that I wasn't going to be taken advantage of anymore. I couldn't help but smile because I was genuinely curious. I wonder what you're offering. She hesitated again, clearly not used to being in this position. Normally, she was the one dictating the terms, making demands, expecting obedience. But now, she was in unfamiliar territory, where I was the one with the power. I could hear it in the way she spoke, in the pauses between her words, in the way she carefully phrased things as if trying to avoid pushing too hard. Slowly, she explained that the family had discussed the situation and had come up with a solution. They could raise a certain amount of money, not enough to cover my full rate, but a start. And on top of that, my uncle, the landscaper, could redo my entire yard, and my cousin, the mechanic, could do any repairs I needed on my car, all for free. It was fascinating. After years of assuming my profession was something they could take advantage of, they were now acknowledging that services had value. They were offering labor in exchange for my labor, as if I was supposed to see this as a fair trade. I let them talk, let them lay out their entire offer, and when they had said their piece, I responded with the same calm, professional demeanor I had used every time they had tried to pull something like this before. Money up front. Everything else, separately. They resisted. Of course, they did. They tried to push back, to negotiate, to convince me that this was a fair trade. They tried to appeal to the idea that families should help each other in different ways, that their offer was reasonable, that I was the one being difficult. I shut it down immediately. Landscaping wouldn't pay my paralegals. Car repairs wouldn't cover my office bills. The work they were offering had value, sure, but it wasn't equal to what they were asking of me. They wanted my time, my expertise, my knowledge of the law, and they wanted me to spend weeks, possibly months, preparing a case that could determine the custody of my sister's children. That was not something you paid for with flower beds and brake replacements. The back and forth went on for a while, them trying to wear me down, to make me see reason, to make me feel like I was the unreasonable one. They threw everything they had at me, guilt, logic, obligation, even half-hearted attempts at flattery. But I stood firm, and in the end, they had no choice but to accept my terms. They collected the required amount, and only then did I agree to take the case. Now, when they turn to me, there's no pretense anymore. No fake friendliness. No attempts to guilt-trip me into doing them favors under the guise of familial love. They don't even try to pretend that they're doing it out of the kindness of their hearts, that this is about anything other than business. They clearly understand now, if you want a favor, get ready to pay. And you know what? I am quite satisfied with that.